Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way.
Today we're going to be talking about integration, and we're going to particularly be looking at how do we integrate all of these skills, and we're going to be looking at how do we then plan based on the information we have, and then finally how do we document what we're dealing with here. First, what are our goals? Our goal is to understand some of the problems of integrating these skills, to review the skills as part of the basic learning sequence, to define the structure of an effective interview, to demonstrate and integrate those skills in an interview, learn the 5 stages of interviewing, and then look at planning and documentation. Because these are some basic things you just need to learn how to do to be able to be effective counselors or coaches. What are the integration problems? Well, when people are learning particular skills like we're talking about in here, you can get so focused on that skill that it sort of becomes artificial. I need to know that. You're thinking in the background, now what do I do next? Now what do I do next? Now what do I do next? And because of that, sometimes there's actually a decrease in your capability of doing things because you're so focused on how do I do it rather than just doing it. Sometimes thinking too much about what you're doing, it's sort of like a centipede. If I had a centipede going along and it was thinking about which leg to move, how hard would that be? But they just move. And that's what we're really looking for here in what we're dealing with. In fact, there's an interesting story in the training of the samurai. The samurai would be trained and they had to learn all these sword skills and they learned all these movements and karate and everything else, and they learned all of those skills. But before they were declared a samurai, they had to take 2 years off and not deal with the skills at all. Why? Because then that would sort of integrate things. Now, we're not saying you need to take off your counseling and not deal with this at all, but we're saying that once you sort of are not thinking particularly how do I do this or this or this, and you've got those skills down, they will integrate with you and for you sort of automatically. Expect a temporary decrease in your natural skills as you're learning the new ones. You must practice them, but eventually they'll integrate when you get real clients. There's an initial decrease in the natural flow and performance, but eventually there will be a significant increase in your natural level if you continue to practice. Pretty soon you're just going to be thinking about the client and you're going to be doing this and this and this and this, and it'll all come together for you. There is sort of a basic sequence of the way things naturally flow when you're doing an interview. And it sort of starts out, you start with asking questions, then you start encouraging, you might start paraphrasing, reflecting the feelings, and then you put it all together. And there are 5 stages of interviewing. The first stage is called rapport and structuring. These are your attending and your connecting skills. Initially, you've got to connect with that person. You've got to listen to that person to start putting things together. Next, you gather information. You're defining the problem in the back of your mind. You're identifying the assets that this person has. So at this point, we're gathering the pieces of the puzzle. The next one we call determining outcomes or analysis. This is where we stick the piece of the puzzle together and make sure they fit. And some of the skills here are going to be asking the different questions to try to analyze and put the thing together. Then we have exploring alternatives and generating solutions. This is sort of summarizing. I heard you say we got this and this and this. Okay, what are our alternatives? How would this all fit together? And we help them to evaluate these alternatives. Now, if you chose this one, what would happen? If you chose this one, what would happen? If you chose this one, what would happen? And so we explore those alternatives, we generate the solutions, and then what do we have to do? We have to generalize what we're doing, and we have to transfer this into action. Maybe it'll be confronting, it'll be putting things together, encouraging them to act, and then hold them accountable. Now, if we want to look at this from a number of different directions, another way we can look at this same thing is we can think about crisis counseling over the phone. And this goes back again to How Can I Help by Hunt. And they sort of break it down this way. First, there's the physical condition. You try and learn where the client's coming from. Then the precipitating event. Why did they call? The presenting problem. How do they see the problem? Personal perception of the client. How do I see the client? Personal emotions, personal behavior, personal objectives, personal resources, personal responsibility, and finally, professional help. What can I do to really help them? Evaluating problem-solving resources, options, and alternatives. There are different ways I can respond to that client. I might be silent. I may give a feeling response, a directive response. You need to do this. A summarizing response. Here are the main points of what I think you said. Paraphrasing. Emphatic response. I feel what you feel like. Realistic response and confronting response. And what was that just a list of? All those different skills that we just talked about in the previous classes. So we then lend the ideas and possible solutions for consideration. I wonder if you did this. And then plan immediate steps and direction. Now you can do that in a very short form, and the short form looks like this. Develop rapport, draw out the facts, find out the goals, help them generate the ideas and give advice, and suggest a specific plan of action, and then hold them accountable. With less verbal clients, we have to be more concrete. Initially, we're going to make very clear, okay, what is it that you want? What can I do for you? Then we'll define the problem, maybe into very specific words. Then we're going to define the goals in very specific ways. Then we'll ask questions from them to generate the alternatives and come up with a concrete plan. In unstructured groups, we do something that's the same. What's called forming, that's really the attending and connecting, isn't it? Then you move to what they call storming. That's when you're trying to figure out, okay, what are the rules of the group? What are we trying to do? How do we relate to each other? And finally, we get to norming. Cohesiveness develops, and people begin to share and set rules. Then we have performing. This is the working stage of the group, where issues are identified and resolved. And we have finally termination, where things are taken care of. What I'm trying to show you is every way we look at this, all these skills integrate and come together in sort of a general form. It's all basically the same stuff that we're talking about here. How about in the area of coaching? Well, you'll eventually take our course in mentoring and coaching, and we'll go through all of these steps. But I want to show you again. It's basically the same thing that's going on here. In coaching, first we have what we call dreaming. And under dreaming, we establish the relationship. Again, that's the connecting. Self-evaluation, gathering information, finding the dream, and then counting the cost. Next thing we do is we make a plan. And then after the plan, we support the acting out. So do you see again, even in coaching, it's still the same basic interviewing techniques, all integrated and put together. How about the counseling plan? How do we put that together? Well, the first thing, again, is the intake, which is really attending and connecting, emphatic listening. Then we have the analysis. The questioning, feeling, analysis skills. What is the goal? What is hindering the goal? What are the real problems? What is the need or root problem? What's the spiritual problem? And we sort all that stuff out. Our next place is the planning. And We list maybe what the problems are. We list the goals and the outcomes we want. And then the methods, how are we going to achieve each one of those goals? And that's a very simplistic way of looking at this thing, but that's what we want to do at this point. We want to take complex problems, break them down to simplistic ones, where you can apply each of these skills in an integrated way. And of course, then we have to execute the plan, and we have to modify the plan if it's not working, and we go back and try again until we make the thing work. So in planning, it's primarily very simple. We just figure out, here are the problems, and here are the goals, and here are the solutions. How about in documentation? In coaching and counseling, the documentation is a little bit different because there are different levels of requirements. First thing in coaching, we have a general information form, just who are they. We have a background information form so we can learn something about them. We have a contract that says we're going to coach you for this amount of money at this particular time, you call us or whatever. We have a mission statement. That means this particular person, their goal in life is to fulfill this particular mission. We have a mission plan. How are we going to fulfill that particular mission? Progress notes, and maybe a payment report if you're taking money for what's going on here. And we're going to focus in here, though, in a little bit on the progress notes, because those are the things that keep track of what's really going on with you. And we use a form called a counseling abstract. In mental health counseling, it's important that you get the documentation down even better in this field. Why? Because you might get a call and this person is going to another counselor later on in their life, and they would like to have your notes as to what you did with them before. And these are part of your records, and you're required to keep these records. And they need to be in a particular form, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The first form is an intake form. It basically gives the basic information again. Then we have an informed consent form. And that means we tell them, these are the rules, this is what's confidential. We will violate confidentiality for homicide, suicide, or child abuse. A release of information form, a counseling children form, videotaping form, insurance forms. We even have a diagnostic interview form that we use to determine what their problem is. You have an overall counseling plan. Again, what is that? That is, here are what I see the problems as, here are the goals, and here we're going to accomplish those things. And then we have progress notes, and the progress notes are probably the most important. Why? That says how you're looking at the situation. Now, there's sort of two forms of this. The first form is, let's call it general form, and some people just write down what happened in the sessions. But that's not the most effective, and that really isn't the industry standard. The industry standard is called SOAP. S-O-A-P. And what that is dealing with is breaking up your session into particular areas. The first one, the S, stands for subjective, or what the person is telling you, their opinions about things. The second one is objective. And what objective means is this is what you observed, you actually saw it. It wasn't just the client's opinion. These are your observations. Then we have the assessment. And the assessment is, this is how I view those things. And this is my conclusions about those things. And this is what I think about the problems and what needs to be done. And finally, we have the plan, or what I'm going to do about it, and what I did do about it in this particular session. Now, it's interesting, this same format is used by doctors. They use it a little bit differently. They use those terms, and they will call the first one synopsis, which is basically the information, observation, analysis, and prognosis. But no matter how you look at it, it's breaking it down into these different areas. And in this session, we're going to try and give you some experience in doing that. If you get into drug and alcohol counseling, you even have more forms to fill out and more things you have to do that are even legally required. The first is the KCPC, or Kansas Client Placement Criteria, that determines what kind of treatment this client should get. We have the SASI, Substance Abuse Subtle Inventory, determining if they're dependent or not. Release of information, a counseling plan, and this has to be updated every 90 days. So there's a formal plan required here. Progress notes, probation reports, a termination summary, possibly payment reports if you're taking payment for this, and all of those things have to be done to document this. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a little bit of experience, and I'm going to give you some fairly complex client situations for you to come up with what the plan would look like, and then we're going to talk about coming up with how we would do the client notes or the progress notes. Here is the first case. What I want you to do for this, I want you to take a piece of paper, and I want you to sit down and you're going to make a list of here are the problems, and here are the goals. And we're not going to probably get into the methods right now of how we would treat each one of those, but we want to at least come up with an overall plan of what we're trying to do with this particular client. Here is the case. John has come to counseling at the assistance of his wife, who threatened to call the police if he did not get help for his anger. She says that he blew up because the dishes were stacked in the sink again, cussed her out, and threw her down a flight of stairs. When she did not respond, he left her for dead. This is the worst incident to date in their 10-year marriage. He was drinking. He says she made him angry because she always threatens to leave and never keeps the house clean. She does not function as a housewife, watches soap operas, reads romance novels, and spends most of her remaining time on the internet. He is extremely jealous of her attempts to make outside friends and has threatened to destroy the computer. He believes she is having an internet affair. Both have not been to church for a long time. He has a good reputation at work and has recently been promoted. They both blame each other for their marriage problems. John was abandoned by his parents at birth and brought up in a series of foster homes. His wife was brought up in an alcoholic family. So the question is, what kind of a plan, what would you see the problems as? What would you see the goals as, both the long-term and the short-term goals that you would have in counseling this particular person? So take some time now and write down your answer, and then we'll come back and I'll give you what I would see as the answer in that particular case. Now realize you might have a lot of different things written down, but this is the way I analyze that particular situation. Our first problem is domestic violence. And we have possibly verbal abuse, we have the jealousy, the left for dead part of that kind of thing, and John's fear of abandonment, which are normal characteristics of domestic violence. We have the drinking. We might have a romance addiction. We just have accusations here. An internet affair. Codependency for sure, based on these different things. Problems in spirituality, and a past history of hurts. Now, what do we want to do to help this couple? Our short-term goals are going to have to be set up boundaries, because they're living totally in chaos. They're running over each other's boundaries in all sorts of different places here. Stop the domestic violence. Stop the drinking. Stop the romance addiction, if there is such a thing. Stop the internet affairs if they exist. Stop criticism and stop the threats of abandonment. Until we get those short-term goals accomplished, we're probably not going to be able to really work very much on this marriage. You have to stop the abuse before you can really help the rest of the situation. The way I say it is, you have to put the fires out in the house before you build the porch. Long-term goals. Treat the domestic violence, probably through some sort of a domestic violence program like we have. Treat the drinking, maybe a whole drug alcohol program necessary here. Treat the codependency, a long-term thing. These are underlying. Build spiritual strength. Deal with those past issues. We call it Monday morning quarterbacking, when you go back and you process all that stuff to get it out of the way. And finally, recognize the marriage one step at a time as it becomes safe. Now from that, what I want you to do is to get an idea of what planning might look like in a very complex case. Now for this next case, what I'd like you to do is to do the progress notes of this particular session that I'm going to give to you and sort out what are the subjective things, the things that you're told that are opinions, what are the objective things, what did you actually see, what is your assessment of the problem, and then what did you actually do in that particular session. Here is the case. Robert brought his wife to counseling because he has just learned that she has had an affair and he doesn't want the marriage to break up, but he appears very angry. When he found out, he cussed her out and slapped her. Kathy, his wife, says she feels neglected by her workaholic husband and has been treated nicely by the new boss at the office. Twice they were working late and something just happened. Robert wants her to quit her job. They are short of money, and when Robert told her she has to quit her job, she broke down and started to cry. Her boss is 20 years older, married, and much like her father, who died 3 years ago. She was her father's favorite child. He always supported her in everything she wanted to do and loved her without condition. Robert is many times critical of her since she does not cook or keep the house up as he expects she should. She says she could never please him no matter how hard she tried, so she quit. The counseling session ended with no resolution over whether she will keep or quit the job. So now let's take a look at that and let's do your SOAP notes for that particular session. Here's what I wrote down. The first thing I did, and it's a good idea if you do have a diagnosis for the client, to put the diagnosis down. If you're not licensed in this state at a clinical level, then you're not allowed to really do diagnosis. You can just carry one on if you're given that to you. Then in the next line, what I would put down, the date and the time, and I would put down a particular code here. In this case, since I saw both the clients, it would be 90847, which means it's family counseling. 90806 would be individual counseling. 90801 is a diagnostic evaluation, and 90835 is group counseling. That's what that means. And of course, I would have my own name there as the counselor. So sort of listen to this. Here's what I put down as subjective. Client reports that after he found out his wife had 2 one-night stand affairs with her boss, he cussed her out and slapped her. She says that she felt neglected by her husband and that her boss paid attention to her. Client wants his wife to quit her job even though they have financial problems. She feels that no matter what she does, it will not be good enough. Then objective. Client presents as very angry. Wife cried during session when asked to quit her job. That's what I observed. Assessment. This is a classical work type affair where the wife felt neglected and connected to her boss, who is like her father, who died 3 years ago. Husband fears the affair will continue if she does not quit her job. Short-term solution-focused goal for this session was to help them negotiate ending the affair so that they can begin to work on forgiveness and restoring their marriage. Because her boss is 20 years older and married, this affair will probably have no future. Long-term quantifiable goal is to set appropriate boundaries and restore the marriage to the point it's acceptable to both partners. Plan. My initial goal in this session was to gather intake information and help both of them understand the other one's point of view. I explained my analysis to them that although having an affair is never justified, many affairs like this one do occur when one mate is needy, in this case feeling neglected and even grieving her supportive father, and someone else meets the need. I attempted unsuccessfully to get them to resolve the issue of her quitting her job during this session. So to see how that all comes together, and I just pieced out the different parts and put them together so somebody reading this fast synopsis would be able to figure it out of what went on in that session and how I saw it and what I thought was going on and what I did. Now let's look at a coaching example. Remember, in coaching, we're just going to do an abstract. And that means we're just going to put down a little bit of information about this session so we can keep on track of what is going on and what we help them with. Here is the coaching example. John has asked you to coach him on finding his call in God and fulfilling it. He has a passion for working with teenagers to see people saved. His strengths: he likes to play and watch sports. He is a good student. Weaknesses: he has problems relating to younger children. Opportunities: he currently has an opportunity to work with the Sunday school at his church, lead Boy Scouts, or work at his church's school as a volunteer athletic coach. He is not sure what to do. He does not really want to go back to school and get a teaching degree. In that same session, we developed a mission statement. Here is his mission statement: help teenagers receive Christ and minister to them as effectively as possible to the glory of God. And we sort of came up with a plan for the next session, because you always want to have an assignment for the next session. Investigate the opportunities further. Determine what it would take to become a certified teacher. What ages would he like to minister to in Sunday school or Boy Scouts? Now I want you to take and write an abstract, about 3, 4, 5 lines of that particular session as to what you would record. Here is my abstract, the way I wrote it. And by the way, you could write many different things. The essence is, how do you simply and effectively as you can put this all together so somebody else reading this will know what went on in this session. Client has a passion to save and minister to teens, but really does not want to go back to school to become a certified teacher. He developed a mission statement to help teenagers receive Christ and minister to them as effectively as possible to the glory of God. He has opportunities in the Sunday school, Boy Scouts, and as a volunteer coach. He loves sports, but needs to investigate these options further, especially since he does not relate well to younger children. He is to do this by the next session. So I hope you see how this all goes together. We're trying to integrate things. We saw that generally there's a natural flow of how all these things just come together and fit together, all these different skills. And the more you do them and the more you really focus on your client, the more they're going to integrate. And then we looked at planning, basically get an idea what the problems are, what the goals are, and then of course you're going to have to come up with methods and how you're going to help them. And then when we document this, we talked about that whole SOAP documentation, the subjective, objective assessment and planning, and then we talked about how you would do a record abstract. Hopefully all these things are coming together for you as we look at this whole skill set that we need to do effective counseling and coaching. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you that you've given us all these methods, Lord, that we've been learning these skills, and I ask that you would put them together effectively in our lives, that we could truly help hurting people, and we give you all the glory and the honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus